On my wedding night, my husband unlocked the bedroom door, placed the key in my trembling hand, and said something I will never forget for the rest of my life. But before I tell you what he said, you need to understand something. I did not marry him because I loved him. I married him because my family had nothing left. My name is Elena. I was 21 years old, and the night I am about to describe was the night I believed would break me forever. The night that, instead, became the beginning of everything real I have ever known. Before any of this happened, my life was the kind of life that nobody writes stories about. I woke up before the sun every single morning. I walked the same 4 blocks to a small bakery near the train station, tied my apron, dusted flour across the wooden tables, and served coffee to strangers who never once looked up long enough to remember my face. My world was small, predictable, safe. I did not mind that. Safety felt like something to be grateful for, especially when I watched other girls my age lose themselves chasing things they could not hold. I had one private belief that I never said out loud to anyone. I believed that a first moment between two people should mean something. It should carry weight. It should belong to the right time, with the right person, for the right reason. So I protected that belief quietly and never let anyone come close enough to challenge it. In my town, people talked constantly about girls who moved too fast, who trusted too freely, who gave too much before they were truly seen. I did not want to become someone's quiet warning. I wanted to be chosen, genuinely chosen, not used and forgotten. Then one ordinary Tuesday evening, I came home from the bakery and found my mother sitting at the kitchen table with her hands folded so tightly together that her knuckles had gone white. I knew before she even opened her mouth that whatever she was about to say would change the shape of my life. She looked at me with eyes that had already cried everything they had, and she said, "Elena, we need to talk." My father had borrowed money years before. A loan taken out quietly during a season when the business was failing and the bills had stacked themselves into something enormous and suffocating. He had believed he could repay it. He had tried. But the years passed the way they always do, quietly and then all at once, and the debt had grown into something our family could not climb over. The lender had waited long enough, and now the month was nearly gone. If we could not resolve it, we would lose the house, the small share in the bakery, and every piece of security we had ever managed to build. My mother's voice dropped very low when she told me the next part. She said there was another way. She said the man who had purchased our debt had made an offer. I asked her what kind of offer. She looked down at the table and told me he wanted a wife. The room did not spin. No dramatic music filled the air. The world simply went very quiet around me, the way it does when something shifts permanently and cannot be shifted back. "Who?" I asked. "Adrian Vance," she said. Everyone in town knew that name. He was 32 years old, wealthy in the way that drew attention without asking for it, and deeply private. He had never married. People said he was cold. They said he did not believe in love, only in contracts and outcomes. They said he had a large estate outside the city where he lived alone with too many rooms and no warmth to fill them. And now, for reasons no one could fully explain, he had decided that he wanted me. I had one night to make my decision. I lay in my childhood bed with the ceiling above me and the weight of everything pressing down, and I thought about my first night, the one I had imagined since I was a teenager, the one with softness and laughter, and a person who looked at me like I was worth seeing. This was not supposed to be a transaction. It was never supposed to feel like a sentence being handed down. But I also thought about my mother's hands, white-knuckled at that kitchen table. I thought about my father, who never spoke about the debt because the shame of it sat on him like something permanent. By morning, I had said yes.
The ceremony was not what anyone would call beautiful.
There was no music, no dancing, no long white dress or flower arrangements or cousins crying in the second row. There were signatures, witnesses, and a ring placed on my finger by a man whose hand barely made contact with mine. Adrian stood across from me in a dark suit with perfect posture and an expression I could not read at all. When he said, "I do," his voice was even and unhurried, the way someone speaks when they are completing a task they have already thought through carefully. I told myself to be strong. I told myself I had made this choice and I would carry it. The drive to his estate was completely silent. The car smelled of leather and rain. City lights passed in slow streaks across the windows, and I sat watching them because looking at him felt like something I was not yet ready to do. He sat beside me with his hands folded and offered nothing. No small talk, no reassurance, no attempt to reach across the space between us. I wondered whether he regretted the arrangement. I wondered whether I was simply an item on a list he was working through. When we arrived, the house was everything I had imagined, and worse. Stone walls, tall, dark windows, enormous and silent in a way that felt less like architecture and more like a statement. It did not look like a home. It looked like a place where people learned to stop expecting things. He opened the bedroom door. The room was large and clean, with a bed in the center draped in white sheets so bright they almost hurt to look at. He walked in first. I followed slowly, listening to every sound my own footsteps made on the floor. And then I heard it. Click. He had locked the door. My chest tightened immediately. My hands began to shake. Everything I had been holding together with quiet determination started to come loose at once. I stood near the wall and watched him remove his jacket and fold it carefully over the back of a chair, and each movement felt amplified and significant in a way I could not control. I was not afraid of pain. I want to be clear about that. I was afraid of losing something I had spent years protecting. My first moment, my right to choose when and how and with whom. And here I was, in a locked room with a man I did not know, bound to him by debt and desperation. He turned and looked at me. Something crossed his face when he saw my expression. Not irritation, not impatience, but something quieter than either of those. Uncertainty, maybe. "Elena," he said softly. He stepped toward me. I flinched without meaning to, and he stopped immediately. He did not push forward. He did not explain it away. He simply stopped and stood there, looking at my hands. "You're trembling," he said. Then he did something I had not prepared myself for. He walked past me to the door and unlocked it. The click of that lock releasing was louder in my memory than almost any sound before or since. He picked up the key and set it on the bedside table within my reach. "You can leave if you want," he said. I stared at him. "What? You married me because you felt responsible for your family, not because you wanted to be here. I know that." He said it plainly, without self-pity and without judgment. "I won't take what isn't freely given." That sentence entered me somewhere deeper than I expected it to. I had spent so many hours imagining this man as someone who saw me as a transaction, as collateral, as something acquired. And now he was standing in his own bedroom telling me I could walk out the door. "I thought you wanted," I started. "Ownership?" he finished quietly. I did not answer. He sighed and sat down. Not on the bed, on the floor, still in his dress shirt, back against the wall, looking like a man who had run out of instructions for how to behave in this particular moment. "I asked for a wife because I was tired of being alone," he admitted. "Not because I wanted control. I don't want a frightened wife." I looked at him sitting on the floor of his enormous house and felt the architecture of everything I had assumed begin to collapse.
After a long moment, I sat down across from him, two strangers on a bedroom floor, married by paperwork, connected by silence. "Why do you lock every door?" I asked eventually. "Habit," he said. A small, uncomfortable smile crossed his face. "I lock every door in the house. I always have."
He got up without another word and disappeared downstairs. I sat very still and wondered what happened next. He came back carrying tea and bread. Simple, slightly awkward, entirely human. He set it between us like a peace offering and sat back down. We ate. And slowly, carefully, we began to talk. He told me he had grown up in this house with too many rooms and not enough people. I told him I had grown up sharing one small room with my younger sister and never having enough space to think. He told me he hated large gatherings, hated being read too quickly by people who had already decided what he was. I told him I had already decided what he was, and I had been wrong. He looked directly at me when I said that, and something behind his eyes shifted slightly. After an hour, the room felt different. Not warm in any dramatic sense, but safe. Like something that had been braced for impact had finally been allowed to rest. He stood up and told me to take the bed. I asked where he would sleep. He nodded toward the sofa in the corner. I told him it was our wedding night. He looked at me calmly and said, "Yes, and we have the rest of our lives." Those 7 words did something to me that no grand romantic gesture ever had. They told me that nothing was owed tonight, that this was not a debt being called in, that whatever this would become, it would be allowed to become it slowly and on its own terms. He turned off the lights. I lay in the wide, white bed and listened to the sound of his breathing settle from across the room. No pressure, no demand. Just 2 people in the same space, finally exhaling. And I understood, standing in the dark beside a sleeping man I barely knew, that my first night had not been ruined. It had simply been replaced by something I had never thought to ask for. Not a perfect dream, a real beginning. Trust is harder to find than passion, and it lasts longer than any dream. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needed to hear it today.